Here now is Chief Meteorologist Tom Sorrells with Talk to Tom.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talk to Tom. I'm Chief Meteorologist Tom Sorrells. Thank you for tuning in. This is a special show for me. It started just a crazy idea back in 2004 to let you, the viewer at home, call us up, talk to me, and I would answer your questions. We normally only did it during a storm, during a hurricane, or maybe even a tornado outbreak. Then gradually I started doing it on Facebook all the time. While I was doing radio, I would let you, people at home, just ask me questions on Facebook Live. Management loved it so much, they said, hey, why don't we do this on TV about once a week? So here we are, every Thursday, 5:30 on the powerful KMG, doing Talk to Tom. So thank you for being here. You're a big part of it. Today, we're going to talk to some of our local officials about what they're doing to make sure our local parks don't go up in smoke. They're trying their best to prevent the fires from burning them down. But first, I want to take some of your questions. Today's first question comes to us from our friend Andrea. Andrea wants to know, why does the humidity increase at night? Okay, Andrea, great question. When you're talking about the humidity, the actual total humidity doesn't go up much at night. It's the relative humidity that goes up. And the reason the relative humidity goes up is because we cool down. Imagine, if you will, that the atmosphere is spread apart and your fingers being spread are like the molecules of air. And between the air, there's water. That's the humidity. At night, when it cools down, everything comes closer together and there's not as much room for the water in the atmosphere. So the relative humidity shoots up. Once you condense the air, cool it down, the moisture begins to come together and you end up with, sometimes dew and sometimes fog and sometimes just higher relative humidity. The humidity comes up as the temperature drops. So if you had temperatures at night that did drop, let's say global warming went crazy and the overnight low was, 88, the daytime high was 95, relatively speaking, the humidity wouldn't go up that much. It only really matters if you have breathing issues and you're on oxygen and you need a relative humidity, and humidity not to be sticky. It's hard to breathe in. Your lungs have a hard time breathing. Sometimes folks have breathing issues, and the higher the humidity, the worse it is for them to breathe. The harder it is for them to breathe with the increased moisture. And it also matters in the way you feel and your body's ability to cool down. All right, next up, our friend Joe. Hey, I know Joe. Joe, welcome to Talk to Tom. Joe is actually, full disclosure, pretty good buddy of mine. He is a former firefighter who lives in Flagler County and is part of the 9/11 Memorial Ride every year. My man Joe, you'll hear me talk about him a lot on Talk to Tom. He's a good guy. He's part of the Knights of the Inferno Motorcycle Club that I'm also an honorary member of. And so let's go ahead and get to Joe's question. Joe writes in and says, Tom, I know that in 1989 it snowed in Florida enough that they had to shut down I-95 from Flagler County north. Would it ever be possible to have a snowstorm in Florida that could possibly have any accumulation? And the answer, Joe, is short, is yes. It absolutely positively could. If that 1989 example that you have there of the Flagler County I-95 north shutting down is part of that equation and part of that example. What happened in that Christmas? That was around Christmas week of 1989. I remember it well. I was not here yet. At that time, I was the chief meteorologist in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, Florence Myrtle Beach, at the ABC affiliate there. And what happened that Christmas is that a big cold front came down, I want to say December 22nd, 23rd. The front pushed into the open waters of the Atlantic and stalled, and a pocket of low pressure formed on that frontal boundary. And the cold Arctic air was in place all over the Tennessee Valley, plunging all the way down here into Florida. Record cold for some folks, and as the moisture overrode that cold air, the snow started to develop and fell. They ended up with a foot of snow in Myrtle Beach and maybe a couple of inches along 95 in the northern sections of Florida. Now, if that had set up differently, that cold front came all the way in, and a low formed on that front a little farther south, had that front formed, say, south of Brevard County, we would have been on the top side of it here in this area, and we easily could have that day picked up enough snow to be called accumulations of snow. Would we have gotten the answer of the 12 inches they got in Myrtle Beach? Probably not, because of the sunshine and the fact that we're subtropical, we would have rebounded nicely, faster than they did in the coastal Carolinas area. But still, it can happen. It doesn't happen much. And people always say, well, 99% of the time it won't happen. It's more than that. It's like one time out of 10,000 or 100,000 days that it could happen. But it has happened before. We have had the ground turn white. It's even snowed as far south as Miami, although it didn't last long. So there you go, Joe. Real quick answers. Yes, it could possibly happen. Let's go ahead and answer this one. It's from our friend Denise McFarland. Why is it called a cyclone when the West Coast gets hit with a major storm, but hurricanes on the East Coast? Okay, great question, Denise, and it really angers a lot of people if I ever use the term cyclone. Like when we're talking about, I hear it the most when we're talking about potential tropical cyclone, 13 or 1 or 2. They're like, why would you call it? Are you just trying to scare people? Well, no. Any pocket of low pressure, any area of low pressure is a cyclone, whether it's a tornado, a hurricane, any vortex, any low in the atmosphere is a cyclone of some nature. Most people get confused by that. When they say cyclone, they think they mean like a twister or a tornado in Kansas. There's a cyclone coming, would be the term they used to use. It's kind of like using the term dirigible instead of blimp. People used to call tornadoes cyclones. Like if you watch old movies, they'll refer to cyclones and the outbreak of cyclones. Well, what they're saying is a tornadic outbreak. So any pocket of low pressure or major load that's coming into the Northwest is a cyclone. It's a big low. And quite often if they're super stormy, you'll hear meteorologists on a national perspective, a national scale, CBS Evening News, whatever, talking about the cyclone that came in or the pocket of low pressure that came in or the storm that came in. But just remember, any hurricane is a cyclone. And in different parts of the world, they have different names. Like in the far Pacific, they're typhoons. In the southern hemisphere, you hear them called something else. Like in Australia, they call it like a willy willy. And we, of course, call anything in the Atlantic basin a hurricane or a subtropical storm. And there you go. Or a potential tropical cyclone. There's your answer, Denise. Thank you very much for watching Talk to Tom. I appreciate it. Our next question comes to us from Nora. Nora, hit it.
Hi, Tom. My name is Nora, and I was just wondering if about global warming, how it's affecting us. I'm really kind of concerned because this weather is being changing a lot, and I'm really, really concerned about it. Especially today, it's too cold, Papacito.
That's Nora, the little Nora on her Publix name tag. Nora, thank you very much for the question. There's all kinds of impacts from global warming affecting us here in Central Florida, and I really appreciate the fact that you talked about it being cold for you and that being part of global warming, because it is. It's all part of climate change. Big swings in our weather is what I think you'll notice the most. We talk about this a lot on Forecasting Change every week in our newsletter, and I address it a lot right here on Talk to Tom. Global warming will impact us here in Central Florida in the coming 20 to 30 years by increasing our average temperature. Yes, and eventually our environment here will end up feeling more like maybe Cancun, Mexico. But it will also lead to wild swings in the weather, extended periods of drought, lots of heavy rain, changes in the mosquitoes and the type of animals that live here. And it's also going to affect wild swings in the winter to where we end up with all of a sudden plunging, vicious winter cold, kind of like what happened to Texas the last couple of winters. And then we end up with raging, hot, long summers and extended hurricane seasons. So those are the biggest impacts I think you're going to have from the global warming. It won't just be global warming, Nora. It will be global weirdness. All right, stay with us. Coming up next, we're going to talk about brush fires and why officials are intentionally setting things on fire at one local park. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the second half of Talk to Tom. I'm Chief Meteorologist Tom Sorrells. I can't thank you enough for sticking around for the second half of this show. We're going to talk about something that's very near and dear to my heart and affects everyone in Central Florida in just a moment. But first, I want to remind you that if you have a question you'd like to have answered, you'd like to be a part of Talk to Tom, all you have to do is go to clickorlando.com/talk to Tom. Submit your question. We'll either use your question or maybe we'll get you to dial in and be on TV with us here as we answer all your questions about weather, life in general, and what goes on in Central Florida. Right now, we'll pivot away from your questions to talk about brush fires. They're scary, they're dangerous, and it seems like they happen all the time. Often we hear about them popping up in dry, leafy areas, but did you know there's actually a whole lot of work that's always being done to make sure that brush fires do not happen at our local parks? Today, I'm being joined by Natural Resource Program Coordinator Allegra Beyer. Hello, Allegra. How are you?
Good. How are you, Tom?
I'm doing very, very well. Thank you so much for joining us. We want to talk about the Econ River Wilderness Area as the team prepares for a prescribed burn. How long will it be closed?
So it'll actually start being closed on January 30th. And what we're going to do then is we're going to do mechanical treatment on 17 acres to reduce the vegetation. As you can see behind me, there's a lot of brush, and it would be very dangerous to burn that right now. So what we're going to do is cut most of the vegetation low, mulch it up so that we can come in and safely burn in another month or two once that project's complete.
Okay, so go ahead and address all that behind you. Like, why do you have to have prescribed burns? I'm not sure people really understand that.
Okay, so there's two main reasons we conduct prescribed fire in Florida. One is to reduce the risk of especially catastrophic wildfires. So if all this burned right now, the flame heights would be very high, and it would be very hard to control. It would be very hard for firefighters to come in and stop it. But if we have lower, more manageable fuels, if lightning strikes, we can bring in fire trucks really easily and put up enough water on that fire to control it quickly. The other main reason that we burn in Florida is because the habitats here have adapted to it. And a lot of times what you'll see in frequently burned habitat is much lower vegetation like wiregrass and saw palmetto that also helps create this climate of easily controlled burns. And a lot of wildlife here really relies on that well-managed habitat.
What do you mean by that? You said the wildlife. Okay, first of all, let's address the fact that you said that the ground has adapted to the burn. You're telling me that since we burn it quite often, and how often do you do it? Every year, every 2 or 3 years? How often?
Yeah, so it depends on the habitat. So a sandhill habitat, which is a lot of what we have out here at Econ River, especially as you go out towards the Econ River, is more grassy. That's called sandhill. And so sandhill should burn every 1 to 3 years.
Okay.
The more frequently you burn it, the more grassy the fuels are, the ground cover.
And if you didn't burn it, you'd get bigger trees or pine trees would pop up?
Yeah, so you'll get what you see behind me, which is a lot of bigger oak trees. And those, one, don't burn very well, so it makes it harder for us to burn. And two, when they do burn, it's under really hot, dry, windy conditions, which is already a scary day to have a fire.
It would torch a lot. It would threaten a lot.
It would, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so back in the old days, 200-300 years ago, when Europeans first came here, is this the type of forest we had, or did we just have a lot of pine and oak, or what did we have?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a lot of old surveys, and we look at accounts of people when they first came here. There was certainly a lot more sandhill habitat. So there were a lot of really large, beautiful longleaf pines, and then lots of wiregrass. And there would be these huge expanses of it. And we get so much lightning in Florida that when lightning would strike, it could burn large acres at a time. Now,
by large acres, you mean 3, 4, 5? How many acres? When you say large acres, you mean like miles and miles, or?
Yep, probably
Wow.
thousands of acres at a time. There was nothing to stop them. But now we have roads, we have buildings, we have a lot of things that we need to protect. And a lot of things just kind of blocking a fire's natural progression. So this is kind of what we do instead to keep those natural ecosystems going and those processes going without creating dangerous conditions.
Okay. So you were talking about the fact that the wildlife benefits. What wildlife are we talking about? And how do you, I don't suppose, what do you do to clear the wildlife out? You just make noise and they run and then you start the fire, or what do you do? How do you treat the wildlife?
Yeah, so what we try to, as we burn, we go slow and we try to give them openings to escape. So you will see deer running out of a zone or certain reptiles and amphibians, but there's also, I'm sure you've seen gopher tortoises in the wild. So these big tortoises in sandy habitat, they dig these really deep burrows. Really? Gopher tortoises, and there's about 300 species in Florida that rely on these burrows. So they'll go down into the burrows while the fire is going to stay safe. It's actually really cool. But when you get these really thick habitats too, sometimes you actually crowd out the gopher tortoises. So then they lose their safe place as well.
Gotcha. So when the gopher tortoise pops back up, what does he find? Everything's burned up. Does he have anything to eat?
Yeah, so, and this is why we try not to do too much at once. So we always leave food nearby for the tortoises or other animals to go to. But you'll find even within a week sometimes, especially during a growing season. So April, May, and once the rains come back, we'll have grasses within a week or two starting to pop up in the zone. It's really cool.
It happens
it's
that
all black
fast.
for maybe a week, and it comes in really quickly. There's a lot of studies now that have shown wildlife come back to these burn zones incredibly fast, weeks and even a month later.
That's interesting. I would have thought it was charred for at least a year. Let's talk about the soil, the benefits of the soil. You said it does benefit the soil. In what way?
Yeah, so when you kind of burn up the vegetation, there's a lot of nutrients there, and those nutrients go down into the soil and they help new things grow. And it also kind of clears back some of this brush, so there's an open space for these new plants to germinate.
That's interesting. I would have thought with the fire it would have burned all the nutrients up and you just have natural charcoal or something. No, but it stays. That's interesting. Okay, that's why you're here, to educate. Talk to me about people coming back to the area after the prescribed burn. When you first come back, what does it look like to the people?
So I think it can be pretty jarring if you've never seen one before, especially on a really hot burn. It depends on how cleanly the area burns. Sometimes we have more of a mosaic, so some areas burn really well and some areas don't. And that's great too, because that gives, again, wildlife a place to escape to or a place to go feed or nest. But sometimes we call it a moonscape. You have everything charred. But again, I would encourage people, if they see something like that, to try to go visit that property again a month later, because the difference that you're going to see can just be staggering. We actually did a burnout at Lake Proctor Wilderness Area last week, so that might be a good property to keep an eye on. But we've been watching sandhill cranes walk through the zone, and we've actually been seeing peninsula cooters, so these big turtles from the lake just hanging out in the burn zone.
Wow.
It's kind of funny. We haven't seen that before, but...
That's awesome. Okay, is there anything else that's being done to protect our local parks that you'd like our viewers to know about?
I would say a lot of what we do also includes fighting invasive species. There's quite a few invasive plant species and some animal species that are negatively impacting our native plants and animals, which are vital to keeping these ecosystems running as well. So we try to keep those in check where we can.
And like what? I know that kudzu has always been a bad thing across the South. It was a plant that was brought in, took over the interstate highways and byways of America. What do we have here in Florida? Name some of those invasive species. What are they?
So Brazilian pepper is a big one, and you'll see that especially going on 95 South all along the roadsides. It's taking over the mangrove forest specifically, but we actually have it in Seminole County too, even though we don't have those coastal areas. So we've treated it, especially in our floodplains, where it can grow quite quickly. Coral ardesia is another one. It looks similar to a wild coffee plant, and it has these really pretty red berries, but it can form complete monocultures, grow above my head, and nothing else can grow underneath.
Kills it
So
from the top
that's a
down.
big one that we've been putting.
Gotcha. Okay, and real quick, I know the Cuban tree frog is a bad invasive species here in Central Florida. Eats everything up and runs the other frogs and toads out. What else would you consider an invasive species of animal?
The black and white tegus are moving further north. They've been spotted here, but they haven't become quite invasive here yet. And then feral pigs, feral hogs.
Wow,
if
really?
you've seen or heard them. I see them occasionally on our properties, and you can recognize it if you come across an area that's really rooted up in the woods. That was almost definitely hogs. So they'll root up large tracts of soil looking for food.
And that's becoming a problem in Central Florida. I did not know that.
Yes, they're everywhere.
Interesting. All right, that's Allegra Beyer from the Natural Resources Program Coordinator position. Thank you so much, Allegra. I learned a lot today. I hope our viewers did too, and good luck with your controlled burn.
Thank you very much, Tom.
All right, we'll see you on some other time on Talk to Tom. All right, remember, if you would like to have your questions answered here on Talk to Tom, just go to clickorlando.com/talk to Tom. And join us back here next Thursday at 5:30. And of course, You can watch Talk to Tom anytime you want. Just stream it on News 6 Plus. I'll see you soon. Bye.